I stood there in the darkness, watching as the thick gray concrete slowly poured through the floor vents of the HOA office building. The machinery hummed quietly behind me. My hands gripped the industrial hose tightly, directing the unstoppable flow. There was no going back now. 5 months ago, I had been a different person, optimistic, rule-following, naive. But that was before they let raw sewage flood my property, before they buried me in fines when I dared to complain, before they threatened to take my home when I spoke up. The smell of cement dust filled my nostrils as I watched their precious leather chairs sink into the hardening mixture. Files, computers, their gleaming reception desk, all of it disappearing under an ocean of industrial-grade concrete. My watch showed 5:15 a.m. In less than 2 hours, those same board members who had laughed in my face would arrive to find their kingdom turned to stone. I am not a vengeful person by nature. But when you flood my land with sewage for months and refuse to fix it, I will make sure you never forget who you messed with. I still remember the day I got the keys to my new house. After 15 years of renting and saving every extra dollar, I finally held the deed to 1423 Oakwood Lane. It was not the biggest or the fanciest home in Pinecrest Estates, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, a proper dining room, and a backyard that stretched toward a line of old oak trees, perfect for the garden I had always wanted to plant. The real estate agent had mentioned something about a homeowners association, but I did not mind. I had heard they kept neighborhoods looking nice and property values high. I imagined friendly community meetings and summer barbecues. How wrong I was. 3 days after moving in, a large white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a leather-bound handbook of HOA rules and regulations. It was nearly 200 pages long. Everything from approved mailbox designs to permitted tree species was meticulously detailed. It seemed excessive, but I wanted to be a good neighbor. I read every page. The following weekend, a group of 5 people in pressed business attire knocked on my door. They introduced themselves as the Pinecrest Estates HOA board. Their smiles were practiced. Their handshakes were firm but brief. The board president, Linda Kessler, a thin woman with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe bob, handed me another envelope. "Just a few forms we need you to sign," she said. "And your first quarterly dues payment of $850 is due by next Friday." I was shocked at the amount but signed the papers anyway. I did not want to make waves so early. For the first month, things seemed normal. I painted my shutters one of the approved colors. I kept my lawn precisely 3 inches tall. I even attended my first HOA meeting, though no one spoke to me except to correct my pronunciation of a board member's name. Then I noticed something strange in my backyard, a small, wet patch of grass near the back fence. At first, I assumed it was from recent rainfall, but days passed and it never dried. In fact, it seemed to be growing. I approached Linda about it after the next HOA meeting. "I have this wet area in my yard that will not dry up," I explained. "I am worried there might be a water main issue or something." She barely looked up from her clipboard. "You are probably overwatering. New homeowners always do, or it could be natural runoff from the hill behind your property." "But there is no hill behind my property," I said. She sighed loudly. "We cannot send maintenance staff for every little puddle, especially when you have only been a member for a few months. Perhaps adjust your sprinklers." I did not even have sprinklers installed yet. As weeks passed, the wet spot expanded. The grass there turned yellow, then brown. A faint, unpleasant odor began to rise from it. Still, my emails to the HOA went unanswered or were dismissed with vague explanations about seasonal water tables and natural ground saturation. One evening, while I was examining the now swampy section of my yard, my neighbor Ted cautiously approached the fence between our properties. "Having trouble with that wet spot?" he asked, looking nervously toward the street. "Yes, the HOA says it is normal, but it keeps getting worse." Ted leaned closer. "Look, I should not be telling you this, but 3 years ago, the family that lived in your house had the same problem. They complained for months. Then suddenly they moved out." "What happened?" I asked. Ted glanced around again. "No one knows exactly, but there were rumors about sewage lines. The HOA denied everything and threatened anyone who talked about it with fines for spreading false information harmful to property values. He walked away quickly when a car drove by. That night, I stood at my kitchen window, staring at the darkening patch in my once beautiful lawn. Something was very wrong here, and I was beginning to realize that the perfect home I had worked so hard for was built on rotten roots, both literally and figuratively. By the 6-month mark in my new home, my backyard had transformed into something out of a horror movie. What began as a small wet patch had spread to cover nearly a third of my yard. The grass was completely dead, replaced by a brackish, bubbling mud that reeked of something foul. Even with windows closed, the smell seeped into my house. I stopped using my back patio entirely. Every time it rained, the situation worsened. Dark, discolored water would pool on the surface, bringing with it chunks of toilet paper and other materials that confirmed my worst suspicions. This was not groundwater or rain runoff. This was sewage. I documented everything with photographs and video recordings. I sent formal complaints to the HOA, complete with time-stamped evidence. Their responses grew increasingly hostile. "Your documentation is inconclusive," read one email. "The board cannot authorize expensive excavation based on amateur photography." Another letter stated, "Continued false accusations against HOA infrastructure could result in fines up to $5,000 per occurrence." I had had enough. Without informing the HOA, I hired Maxwell Plumbing, a private company with environmental certification. The inspection cost me nearly $2,000, money I had been saving for new furniture. The plumbers arrived early on a Tuesday morning. They brought specialized cameras and soil testing equipment. By afternoon, the lead technician, Dave, called me to the backyard. His expression was grim. "I have been doing this for 27 years, he said, showing me footage from their underground camera. "And this is one of the worst cases I have seen. There is a major fracture in an 8-inch sewage pipe running directly under your property. Raw waste has been leaking into your soil for months, maybe years." My stomach turned. "Whose pipe is it? Mine?" Dave shook his head. "No way, this is a main line. According to these county maps, it is part of the neighborhood sewage system owned and maintained by your HOA. See these markings?" He pointed to stamps on the pipe. "That is their identification code." I paid extra for a comprehensive written report, complete with video evidence and soil contamination tests. The results were alarming. Not only was human waste present, but the contamination had reached dangerous levels. My property was literally a biohazard zone. Armed with professional evidence, I requested an emergency meeting with the HOA board. They reluctantly agreed, though they scheduled it for 7:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, when most homeowners would be heading to work. I arrived with my documentation organized in a binder. The 5 board members sat behind a long table in their glass-walled office building at the neighborhood entrance. Linda's face remained expressionless as I presented my findings. "As you can see from the professional assessment, there is a broken sewage line owned by the HOA that is flooding my property with raw waste," I explained, sliding copies of the report across the table. "Not only is this destroying my property value, but it is also a serious health hazard." The board members glanced at the paperwork without picking it up. Linda cleared her throat. "These allegations are serious," she said coldly, "and frankly, inflammatory. Our records show no reported issues with that sewage line. Furthermore, our maintenance team believes the problem likely stems from improper installation of your own home's waste system." "But the pipe has your identification code," I insisted. "The plumber confirmed it belongs to the HOA." The treasurer, a balding man named Richard, leaned forward. "Outside contractors are not authorized to interpret HOA infrastructure. For all we know, you could have hired someone to present false information." I could not believe what I was hearing. "Why would I do that? I just want my yard fixed." "Perhaps to avoid paying for repairs to your own plumbing," Linda suggested, "or to pursue litigation against the association for financial gain." They were turning this around on me, making me the villain. The meeting ended with them promising to investigate further, which I now understood meant do nothing. As I walked out of their pristine office building, I noticed another homeowner waiting nervously in the lobby. She avoided eye contact, but I recognized her, Mrs. Jenkins, from 3 streets over. I had seen her yard recently. Dead plants, wet soil, the beginnings of the same nightmare. That evening I sat on my front porch, staring at the HOA building in the distance. Through my research, I had discovered that at least 7 homeowners had faced similar issues in the past 5 years. All had either given up, moved away, or been silenced through legal threats. The HOA was not just negligent. They were engaged in a systematic cover-up, and I had just become their newest target. The retaliation started exactly 3 days after our meeting. A certified letter arrived, informing me that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized excavation of community property, referring to the plumber's inspection. A second fine of $750 followed for maintaining hazardous conditions on a residential lot. They were punishing me for exposing their negligence. I attempted to appeal the fines through the process outlined in the HOA handbook. My request was denied without explanation. When I tried to bring it up at the next community meeting, Linda cut my microphone after 30 seconds, citing time constraints. Desperate for allies, I began reaching out to neighbors. Most seemed sympathetic when we spoke in private, but few were willing to stand with me publicly. Ted explained why one evening. "Everyone here is trapped," he said quietly as we talked over the fence. "The Millers down the street tried to fight a roof repair order last year. The HOA dragged them through arbitration for 8 months, then put a lien on their house for unpaid fines. The Johansons challenged an assessment for the new playground no one wanted. Their garbage mysteriously stopped being collected. They were drowning in violations within weeks." I was shocked. "That cannot be legal." Ted shrugged. "Maybe not, but who has the money to fight it? The HOA has a legal fund we all pay into. They can outlast anyone in court." He was right. Most of my savings had gone into the down payment for my house. I could not afford a lengthy legal battle. Still, I refused to back down. I began documenting everything meticulously, every letter, every email, every conversation. I installed security cameras around my property and kept backup copies of all evidence at my office. The HOA escalated their pressure. Anonymous complaints began appearing about my yard maintenance, my mailbox position, even the color of my garden hose. Each complaint resulted in a violation notice and accompanying fine. Board members drove past my house slowly, taking photos. Neighbors I had been friendly with stopped returning my waves. Someone reported me to the city for illegal home modifications, though I had made none. The sewage situation worsened with each passing week. The contaminated area spread to nearly half my backyard. The smell became so overwhelming that I received a notice from the HOA citing my property as a nuisance due to noxious odors. I reached out to a real estate agent to assess my home's current value. The news was devastating. Even if I disclosed the sewage issue as legally required, my home would sell for nearly 40% less than what I had paid just months earlier. I was underwater financially, just as my yard was underwater with sewage. In desperation, I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was an hour's drive away. I feared using anyone local might have connections to Pinecrest Estates. Attorney James Wilkins reviewed my documents carefully. "You have a strong case," he said. "Clear negligence, possible fraud in concealing the sewage issue from you during purchase, environmental violations." My hopes lifted momentarily. "However," he continued, "these cases typically take 2 to 3 years to resolve. HOAs are structured to make litigation difficult. The minimum retainer for something like this would be $25,000, with total costs potentially reaching 6 figures. My heart sank. I do not have that kind of money. "Few do," he said sympathetically. "That is how they win." I drove home in silence, the weight of hopelessness pressing down on me. That evening, I found yet another violation notice on my door, this time for improper vehicle parking. because my car had been in my driveway for more than 12 hours. I walked to my backyard fence and looked out at the muck that had once been clean grass. A family of toads had moved in, the only creatures that could tolerate the toxic environment. Even they looked miserable. My phone pinged with an email notification. The HOA was raising quarterly dues by 30% to cover unforeseen maintenance expenses. The irony was almost too much to bear. I was alone, isolated, financially stretched to breaking point, but something deep inside me refused to surrender. They wanted me broken or gone. I would be neither. With my options dwindling, I turned to local government for help. Surely, raw sewage flooding a residential property violated health codes. I filed a formal complaint with the city's environmental health department, requesting an official inspection. 2 weeks later, a city inspector named Marcus arrived. He was thorough and professional, taking soil samples and documenting the contamination with official equipment. His findings matched those of my private inspector: dangerous levels of fecal coliform bacteria, clear evidence of sewage contamination from a broken main line. "This is definitely a code violation," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I will file my report today. The property owner responsible for this line will be ordered to repair it immediately." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. That hope was crushed when I received a copy of the city's enforcement letter. It had been sent not to me, but to the HOA, officially identifying them as the responsible party. The letter ordered them to repair the line within 30 days or face daily fines. The HOA's response came quickly. They submitted a 27-page appeal claiming the city inspector's methods were flawed, that recent heavy rainfall had compromised his samples, and that their own environmental consultant, whom they never named or produced, had found no evidence of sewage contamination. They requested a formal hearing, which would delay any action by at least 6 months. In the meantime, they launched a new offensive against me. A formal cease and desist letter arrived, claiming I had made false and defamatory statements about the HOA on community forums. I had indeed posted about my situation on a neighborhood Facebook group, seeking support from other homeowners. The letter demanded I remove all posts, issue a public retraction, and pay $5,000 for damages to the association's reputation. When I refused, they filed a lawsuit against me for defamation. The complaint listed every post I had made, every neighbor I had spoken to, even private conversations I had with board members. Somehow, they knew details only someone who had been listening could know. My meager savings dwindling, I could not afford to fight both the sewage issue and a defamation suit simultaneously. My attorney advised me to settle $5,000 and a signed non-disclosure agreement. I had no choice but to agree. The non-disclosure prohibited me from discussing the sewage issue with neighbors, on social media, or with the press. I was effectively silenced. Throughout this nightmare, the sewage continued to flow. The contamination spread beyond my fence line, threatening to reach the decorative pond at the end of our street. Rather than fix the actual problem, the HOA sent workers to install a 6-foot privacy fence along the back of my property. "For aesthetic purposes," the notice read, "to maintain neighborhood visual standards." In reality, it was to hide their negligence from view, out of sight, out of mind. One evening, after receiving yet another fine, this one for the unauthorized wildlife habitat that my sewage swamp had become, I broke down completely. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by violation notices, legal papers, and unpaid bills, and sobbed until my throat was raw. Everything I had worked for was slipping away. My perfect home was now a toxic waste site. My savings were depleted. My reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed. And still, sewage bubbled up from the ground like a perverse spring. Through my tears, I noticed a new email from the city. The HOA's appeal had been granted. The investigation would be reopened with a hearing scheduled for 8 months later. 8 more months of sewage. 8 more months of fines. 8 more months of hell. Something inside me changed that night. The despair hardened into something else, something cold and resolute. If the system would not give me justice, perhaps I needed to create my own. I stood up, wiped my tears, and walked to my home office. On the wall was a framed photo of my grandfather, a construction foreman who had taught me everything about building and demolition. Beside it hung his old work helmet. "They want to play dirty," I whispered to the empty room. "Let us see how they handle a little dirt of their own." For the next month, I became the model HOA resident. I paid my fines without complaint. I attended meetings silently. I even helped Mrs. Kessler carry groceries to her car when I saw her struggling at the local market. All the while, I was researching, planning, calculating. My first breakthrough came while reviewing county property records. The HOA office building, that gleaming glass and stone structure at the entrance to our neighborhood, was technically zoned as mixed-use administrative with maintenance facilities. This classification allowed for certain construction activities without requiring additional permits. Late one night, I discovered something else interesting in the HOA's own bylaws. As a homeowner, I was entitled to request maintenance services for community property. The sewage line was, by their own admission in legal filings, community property, even if they denied its state of disrepair. The plan began to take shape in my mind. Bold, risky, perfectly symmetrical in its justice. I reached out to my cousin Michael, who ran a small construction company 2 counties over. We had not spoken in years, but blood runs thicker than water, or sewage in this case. "I need access to a concrete pump truck," I explained when we met at a diner far from Pinecrest Estates, "and about 5 cubic yards of quick-setting industrial-grade concrete." Michael studied my face for a long moment. "This sounds like the kind of favor that comes with questions I do not want answers to." "Probably for the best," I agreed. He nodded slowly. "I have a job finishing up next Tuesday. Equipment would be available Wednesday morning. No job scheduled until Thursday." "Perfect." Over the next week, I finalized my preparations. I created a formal maintenance request using the HOA's own form, complete with official letterhead I had saved from previous communications. I requested structural reinforcement of community drainage systems, technically accurate if misleading. I scanned Linda's signature from previous documents and superimposed it onto the approval line. Not legal, certainly, but neither was flooding my property with human waste for months. I purchased an official-looking uniform from a work supply store, beige pants, button-up shirt with a generic maintenance patch. I obtained a clipboard, work boots, and an ID badge holder that would look legitimate at a glance. Using the HOA's own scheduling system, accessible through the resident portal, I booked maintenance for the main office building at 5:00 a.m. on Wednesday. Early enough that no one would be there, late enough that security patrols would have ended their night shift. The night before, I barely slept, not from guilt or fear, but from anticipation. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt powerful, in control. Wednesday morning arrived with a light drizzle, perfect weather to explain why 2 men in work clothes would be rushing to get inside. Michael arrived at 4:30 a.m. with the pump truck, parking it behind the building near the service entrance. We unloaded equipment quietly, efficiently. I checked my watch. 4:55 a.m. In just a few hours, the board members would arrive for their 8:00 a.m. meeting, the same meeting where they planned to vote on another dues increase to cover their legal expenses. "Ready?" Michael asked. I looked at the building, thinking of my destroyed backyard, my depleted savings, the months of humiliation and injustice. "They flooded my land with sewage," I said quietly. "It is only fair they understand what that feels like." Michael nodded. We put on our hard hats and moved toward the service entrance. The service entrance door opened with a soft click. The master key I had copied from the maintenance shed during a community cleanup day worked perfectly. We slipped inside, our footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The HOA office was meticulously designed. Marble floors, glass-walled meeting rooms, expensive artwork depicting the neighborhood in various seasons. Everything about it screamed excess, all funded by our ever-increasing dues. "We have 90 minutes maximum," I whispered to Michael. "Security does a drive-by at 6:30. He nodded, uncoiling the heavy industrial hose connected to the pump truck outside. I moved quickly through the first floor, locating the main HVAC access points. The building had a raised floor system for running cables and ventilation, perfect for our purposes. I removed the first floor vent cover near the reception desk and inserted the moisture sensor I had brought. Bone dry. No risk of backing up into city systems. This was important. I wanted to punish the HOA board, not create a public hazard. Working methodically, I sealed off the external drainage access points with expanding foam, ensuring the concrete would stay contained within the building. Michael prepared the mixture in the truck. Standard concrete with an accelerating agent that would begin hardening within 30 minutes and be virtually solid within 2 hours. At precisely 5:15 a.m., we began. The industrial pump hummed to life, pushing the thick gray slurry through the hose. I directed the flow into the first floor vent. The concrete moved like lazy lava, spreading beneath the raised floors, filling every channel designed for air and cables. Within minutes, I could feel the vibration as the mixture found pathways throughout the building's infrastructure. We moved methodically from vent to vent, ensuring even distribution. The conference room where the board held their kangaroo court meetings. Linda's private office with its expensive ergonomic chair. The file room containing all their meticulous records of violations and fines. At 5:45 a.m., the concrete began seeping up through floor seams, right on schedule. The building was taking a concrete bath from the inside out. Slowly, inexorably, it crept across the marble floors, around expensive furniture into computer equipment and filing cabinets. By 6:00 a.m., the first floor had transformed. What was once pristine was now a surreal landscape of hardening gray sludge. Modern art, indeed. "That should do it," Michael said, checking the pump gauges. "We have used almost all 5 yards. I nodded, surveying our work. The concrete was already beginning to set, turning from liquid to solid. By the time anyone arrived, it would be too late to stop the process. We carefully extracted the hose, wiped down any surfaces we had touched, and collected our equipment. The maintenance request form, with Linda's forged signature, was left prominently on what remained visible of the reception desk. A final touch of bureaucratic irony. At 6:20 a.m., we slipped out the service entrance, locked it behind us, and departed in the pump truck. Just as we turned the corner, I saw the security patrol car making its approach, right on schedule. I returned home, showered away any concrete residue, and changed into normal clothes. Then I did something I had not done in months. I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. For the first time since moving to Pinecrest Estates, I felt at peace. The chaos began at 7:52 a.m. Emergency vehicles, police, fire trucks, even a hazmat team roared past my house toward the HOA office. My phone buzzed with neighborhood watch alerts and frantic messages from the HOA board canceling all meetings indefinitely due to an infrastructure emergency. I drove to work as usual but took a slight detour that would pass by the office. The scene was everything I had hoped for. Board members stood outside in their business attire, faces contorted with rage and disbelief. Linda was screaming at a police officer, jabbing her finger toward the building. Through the glass walls, I could see the concrete had done its job perfectly. The entire first floor was entombed in solid gray stone. As I drove past, Linda looked up. Our eyes met briefly. I gave her a small, polite wave, the same wave she had given me when dismissing my sewage complaints. Her face went pale. She knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not enough to prove anything, but in that moment she knew who had brought her kingdom down. I continued to my office job, logged in, and began my workday as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside, I felt the satisfying weight of justice finally being served. They had buried my property in sewage. I had buried their office in concrete. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. The aftermath unfolded better than I could have imagined. Within hours, news vans surrounded the HOA office. Suburban office mysteriously filled with concrete made headlines across local stations. Social media exploded with theories and jokes. Someone even started selling T-shirts with "Concrete Justice" printed across the front. The HOA board immediately pointed fingers at me. Linda led the charge, citing our ongoing dispute as motive. Police officers appeared at my door that very evening. I expressed shock and concern when they questioned me. Yes, I had issues with the HOA. No, I had no idea who would do such a thing. I was at home sleeping, then went directly to work, as my home security cameras and office login records would confirm. The forged maintenance request. Anyone with access to HOA letterhead could have created it. The police seemed skeptical, but had nothing concrete, pun intended, to connect me to the incident. The security cameras at the HOA office had mysteriously malfunctioned that morning. The maintenance company listed on the work order did not exist. The pump truck had no identifying markings and was returned to my cousin's job site where it blended in with other equipment. While the investigation continued, something unexpected happened. Neighbors began talking first in whispers, then openly. My sewage problem was not unique. The HOA had been covering up infrastructure failures throughout the neighborhood for years, silencing complaints through intimidation and legal threats. Mrs. Jenkins finally spoke publicly about her yard. The Thompsons revealed how their basement had flooded repeatedly. The Garcias shared documentation of denied claims and retaliatory fines. One by one, homeowners came forward with similar stories of negligence and bullying. The local newspaper ran an investigative piece titled "Beneath the Surface: HOA Corruption at Pinecrest Estates." They uncovered financial irregularities, unauthorized use of funds, and personal connections between board members and contracted service providers. The concrete incident had cracked open much more than a building. It had broken the dam of silence. City officials, now under public scrutiny, moved quickly. They ordered a comprehensive inspection of all sewage lines in the neighborhood. The results confirmed what many already knew. The system was failing throughout Pinecrest Estates, with evidence of patch jobs rather than proper repairs going back nearly a decade. The HOA was placed under administrative supervision. Linda and 2 other board members resigned when facing potential criminal charges for environmental violations and financial misconduct. The remaining members were removed through a special election. An interim management company took over operations. Their first action was to approve emergency repairs to all affected properties, including mine. After nearly a year of living with sewage in my backyard, I watched as proper equipment and actual professionals dug up and replaced the broken line. The concrete-filled HOA office became something of a local landmark. After determining that removing the hardened material would cost more than the building was worth, the insurance company declared it a total loss. It was eventually demolished, with the new HOA administration operating out of a modest rented space in a nearby strip mall. As for legal consequences, the investigation into the concrete incident gradually lost momentum. With no conclusive evidence and overwhelming public sympathy for the homeowners who had suffered under the previous board, the case was eventually filed as unsolved, though I occasionally caught knowing looks from neighbors who had put the pieces together. 6 months after the concrete incident, I hosted my first backyard barbecue. The new grass was lush and green. The air smelled of charcoal and hamburgers instead of sewage. Neighbors who had once avoided me now filled my patio, sharing stories and laughter. Ted raised his beer bottle toward me when no one else was looking. "Quite a coincidence," he said quietly, "how things worked out." I shrugged. Sometimes justice finds a way. The new HOA was different, transparent, responsive, focused on actual community needs rather than power trips and property values. Quarterly dues were reduced by 30%. Violation notices became rare and reasonable. The atmosphere throughout Pinecrest Estates lightened, as if a heavy shadow had been lifted. Late one evening, as summer turned to fall, I stood at the edge of my backyard, looking out at the healthy grass and blooming flowers. A year ago, this spot had been a toxic swamp, and I had been a broken, desperate man drowning in sewage and bureaucracy. I thought about the concrete, now buried in a landfill along with the remnants of the old HOA office. I thought about Linda and her board members, some facing fines and community service for their years of negligence and corruption. I thought about my own actions, extreme, certainly, but effective in a way that playing by the rules never could have been. Was I proud of what I had done? That was complicated. But standing here now on dry, clean ground, surrounded by a neighborhood finally free from tyranny, I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, when the system is broken beyond repair, you need to pour something new in its place and let it set hard as concrete.